Hello, and welcome back to Mission 501, the podcast, Psychology at Work with a Nonprofit Twist. I'm Dr. Ryan Aldrich, and I can't wait to share a new initiative I began and how it's been going. So recently, I began hosting Mission 501 collaborative conversations about various topics in mission-driven organizations. So people come together, and I present a series of questions, and people pick a question and share their thoughts, and conversation happens around that. There's very little structure, and I've had a couple of these conversations, and the takeaways so far have been absolutely amazing. The first conversation I had was actually on a field brief that I wrote called Compliance to Curiosity. And honestly, this was a great initial conversation to have in this collaborative format. It was genuinely good. The kind of conversation where you leave thinking about things a little bit differently than when you entered the conversation. So this topic is something I think a lot of people in this field think about and feel, but don't always name out loud. And that's that there's this tension between compliance and actual professional development in human service organizations. And those two things are not the same, although sometimes organizations treat them like they are. And in this episode, I'm going to share the takeaways from the conversation on compliance to curiosity and what this might mean for supported employment and human service organizations in general. Welcome to Mission 501, the podcast exploring the psychology of work with a nonprofit twist. We dive into topics like motivation, leadership, team dynamics, and more, all through the lens of purpose-driven work, because doing good work should feel good too. Let's get started. So the biggest takeaway from the conversation was that compliance is necessary, but it's not the same as professional development. And I'd actually like to start with that distinction because I want to be clear. Compliance matters in human service organizations. It's not optional. Organizations need staff to understand regulations, documentation requirements, confidentiality, billing, safety. All of that matters a lot. And it all exists for great reasons that history has shown are necessary to make sure that ethical services are being provided. But the question that keeps coming up and kept coming up in this conversation is, does completing a mandated training actually make someone a better professional? And the answer isn't straightforward. Maybe, sometimes, but not automatically. As it turns out, in my doctoral study that explored the presence of self-directed learning in professional development among employment support professionals, participants in that study had mixed feelings on whether compliance training counted as legitimate professional development. There's a difference between confirming that someone sat through a presentation and maybe passed a quiz, and knowing that they can actually navigate a complicated situation with a job seeker or an employer, or a family member who might be frustrated about how services are going. Real professional development is deeper than information exposure. It's more about learning how to think and how to adapt, how to make a judgment call when the answer isn't in a manual or a training module. And we see that a lot when we're working out in communities. And honestly, some of the most important skills in supported employment are really hard to teach in a 60-minute webinar. When you're out in communities learning new situations and seeing individual impacts, it's not really possible to look back at a training manual and say, well, one size fits all, we can match this to any situation. It's very difficult to do that. And that's where people really wondered, where does mandated training fall when it comes to considering it professional development? And that brings me to something else that came up, and I don't think it's going to surprise anyone who's been in the field for any amount of time. People learn by doing the actual work. You can explain systematic instruction in a classroom. You can walk someone through the principles of customized employment, but the real understanding, that shows up in the field. It happens when a job coach runs into a barrier that they didn't see coming, or when an employment specialist has to make a judgment call. Do I step in right now, or do I let this person work through the issue they're experiencing? And then there's the reflection afterwards. What worked? What didn't? What might I do differently next time? Shadowing and observation, they're valuable, don't get me wrong, and it's something that when people are onboarded into human service organizations, it's a critical piece. Shadowing and observing is usually the first thing people do right after they've reviewed all the manuals. But those are just a starting point and not a destination. If someone watches a skilled job coach work without understanding why certain approaches are effective, they're going to struggle the moment the next situation looks even a little bit different. And as we know, in supported employment, no two situations are exactly alike. That's just the nature of the work. One of my favorite moments from the conversation was about conditions that allow curiosity to exist. We talked a lot about curiosity. Curiosity doesn't just happen. It needs a certain kind of environment to survive. Mainly when staff feel safe, when they genuinely believe they can ask questions, try new things, and admit when they don't know something without being judged for it. That's when real learning happens. When people take ownership of their own development instead of just waiting to be trained, that's self-directed learning. And now we're going back to my doctoral study where people shared their experiences on when they felt compelled and encouraged to explore. They learned more powerfully and more impactfully. And that's where mentorship programs, communities of practice, peer conversations, and reflective supervision really earn their value. They create space to think out loud, space to be able to say, I'm not sure I handled that right without it feeling like a performance review. And the questions change as well. Instead of, did you complete your training? Can we check this box? Organizations can start asking, what are you noticing out there? What are you trying to figure out? How can we help each other become better professionals? Those are very different conversations, and they're conversations that tend to produce much stronger professionals over time. We also get into something that I think is one of the more nuanced challenges in supported employment, and that's role clarity. So there's a constant temptation in supported employment to help too much. A job coach sees someone struggling and steps in to complete the task for them. And the intention is almost always good. Staff want to be helpful. That's usually why they took a supported employment job in the first place. But we all know stepping in to help or do the job for someone is not teaching them to do the job. But that temptation lingers. We want people to be successful. And over time, that kind of help, it undermines the outcomes we're trying to achieve. We're not here to do the work for the people. We're here to support them in doing it themselves. Professional development helps staff understand where genuine support ends and where substitution begins. And that distinction matters a lot. When people are clear on their role, they're in a much better position to actually promote independence. And that's really the whole point of the work that's being done. Now, really importantly, we didn't spend the whole conversation talking like organizational culture exists in a vacuum, because it doesn't. The group was really honest about the pressures leaders are navigating every single day. Funding constraints, billing requirements, workforce shortages, recruitment challenges, administrative load that never seems to shrink and only gets bigger. And those pressures can send a message, even unintentionally. Do what's required. Only do what can be built. Do not innovate. Maybe those last words aren't actually said, but that's what the message is. And when organizations are stretched that thin, curiosity starts to feel like a bit of a luxury, like something you get to do after the real work is done. And I'm going to push back on that framing. Curiosity isn't a luxury. It's the engine of the work itself. It's what drives us to find better strategies, to solve problems that don't have obvious solutions, and to improve over time. Best practices are born from curiosity. And if we look back 10, 15, 20 years at what best practices were then, we see how much has evolved. And curiosity and research and experimentation is what did that. So the challenge, and I have to admit I don't have a clean answer on this, is how do you protect curiosity when everything else is demanding all of your attention, all the documentation, everything else that needs to be done, where that mandated training comes in. And maybe that's what made this last piece so meaningful to me. When we talked about why people stay in supported employment, sometimes for years and through a lot of hard times, what kept coming up in this conversation was curiosity and self-direction. Curiosity about how to better support job seekers. Self-direction on engaging employers in ways that actually work. curiosity about how to remove barriers that feel immovable. And that curiosity and self-direction is one of supported employment's greatest assets. It doesn't show up on a billing report, but it's what drives a lot of the best work that gets done. And when organizations can nurture this, they're going to build stronger professionals and more resilient teams. When they let it all get buried under compliance checklists and task completion, well, that's when both learning and engagement start to slip. So here's where I land after having this conversation. Compliance is necessary. I said it before, I'm saying it again. Full stop. I can't argue against the importance of compliance. But compliance alone doesn't create excellent professionals. It creates people who know the rules, and that matters, but that's not the whole job. Growth and development happens when you pair clear expectations with trust, reflection, mentorship, and with room to actually explore not only what you're doing, but why you're doing it. So if compliance keeps the system functioning, curiosity helps it improve and move forward. And if we want stronger organizations and better outcomes for the people we serve, we need both. Thanks for listening. If today's episode hit on something you're working through in your own organization, I'd love to hear about it. How you're balancing compliance with real professional growth, what's working, what isn't, and how you're working through it all. And if you want to be part of future Mission 501 collaborative conversations, follow me on LinkedIn and you'll receive the latest invites. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep advancing the mission. Take care, everyone.